Now let's stay with the National Assembly and go beyond the excitement of today's shouting contest in the Senate, because the deadline for submissions to the House of Representatives committee in charge of constitutional amendments is also today. And according to reports, the committee, led by the Deputy Speaker, Benjamin Kalu, has received thousands of memoranda on various subjects. This will be the sixth amendment so far to the 1999 Constitution, but there have been calls for something much more fundamental, such as completely abolishing that Constitution and enacting a new one, with critics arguing that the 1999 Constitution lacks legitimacy and has been unable to address Nigeria's challenges. But the National Assembly has so far declined to make such a radical move. So the process of fine-tuning the current constitution is proceeding apace. And one organization, known as Africa's Morning Center for Public Policy and Good Governance, has sent 5 constitutional amendment suggestions to the committee. So what do they make of the process so far? Well, the group's executive director is Chima Christian. He's also a public policy analyst, and he joins me now in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, why is it important in your assessment to amend the current Nigerian constitution, briefly?
Well, you've reported it already that many people feel that that constitution was imposed on Nigerians, and that given the experiment from 1999 to this point, that it has barely scratched the surface, let alone address the many challenges facing Nigeria. But then, since we don't have the opportunity for large-scale unbundling or indeed dismantling of that constitution, the best we can do within the given circumstances is to try to make piecemeal attempts at patching it at the corners.
Right. Well, we'll come to more of that in a minute. But some have said that the Constitution needs something much more radical and much more fundamental than merely tinkering with it, and that this was an opportunity missed because the National Assembly is simply playing parliamentary ping-pong and is not really going to get to the heart of the matter. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree partly with that thought, but then the extreme part of it is that when you have that thought, it keeps you from participating, it keeps you away from participating. Yes, there is an ideal situation where you would have everyone come together. For instance, the last that we tried it was during the confab to design a new roadmap for Nigeria, but wherein you've seen that the key political actors of the day are unwilling to have that conversation. The best you can do, given the circumstances, is to try to find out within this constitution what are those pain points that we can address, or that we can at least mobilize consensus on, and then that things will move even if it's marginally better. And so those are the pain points that you want to address while you are waiting for the day that you have that opportunity to do that large-scale damage on the 1999 Constitution.
No, I understand that, but I don't mean to sort of beat a dead horse.
Yes.
But how much do you think the current constitution undermines the political and economic development of Nigeria? Because there are those who believe, as we mentioned a minute ago, that the current constitution is so deeply flawed that it's tested this country's cohesion to breaking point. Do you agree with that assessment?
Totally agree with that assessment. In fact, if it is left for me, I would have that constitution disbanded today, and then the discussions for enacting a new one start immediately. However, I've mentioned earlier that you have an ideal situation where this is what you would want, but then given the circumstances, it's only pragmatic to see that these things cannot happen now. First, before you talk about dismantling a constitution, you have to have a willing president. It's important to note that no civilian administration since 1960 has been able to make any large-scale structural adjustment in Nigeria. Whether you're talking about the creation of 24 states, 30 states, 36 states, all of these things have been done by the military.
Yeah,
the changing of constitutions have been done by the military. So that constitution in itself has imposed, it makes it very difficult. In fact, I can liken it to that he-goat in the village that will refuse the owner to follow the owner willingly to the market. So that constitution has made it so much so that you can, beat around the corner.
Well, to be honest, I don't blame the he-goat because the he-goat assumes that he's going to be slaughtered at some point. So why would he want to follow the owner?
Yeah, now you see it, so that if you want to indeed force this he-goat to go to the markets, that you must have a willing president,
right,
and that you must have a willing lawmakers. Because not that attempts have not been made in times past, But then I find out that those attempts in my analysis have not been ambitious enough. And where they are ambitious, they've been lacking in energy. And you see this with the lips. I've not seen any president of the country since 1999 that really wanted to change our constitution. Not one. Because they know how to win elections. I'm telling you, the amount of energy you expend winning a presidential election is no match to the amount of energy you will expend to convince Nigerians to change their constitution. But I've not seen a president that rolled up his sleeve and gets to work about these things. So, and I'm not seeing that with the current president. So what we can achieve within the given circumstances is to make piecemeal attempts.
Well, I don't mean to water down what you're saying there or to divert attention from it, but I was quite curious about that he-goat thing. I mean, why not a she-goat? But in any case, let's move on. So you're working within the limited parameters. You submitted your organization 5 constitutional amendment suggestions to the committee. Tell us about these. What are they?
Oh, firstly, they were all of these 5 are focused strictly on Nigeria's electoral space. And then we unbundled them for the ease of administration, because if you look at that organization and you've looked at what has happened in times past, now you see a subcommittee headed by a clerk and then have a few associates, put there. And they have these piles and piles of recommendations. Many times they don't get to read it, let alone distilling. So what we did was that, okay, we looked at their previous amendment and said, what was it like? And so we saw that the ones that successfully scaled through were the ones that were bundled, specifically located to what you want to achieve. So if you are, for instance, targeting section 77, 78, 118, you say, this is what I'm targeting. This is the clause I don't like about this. This is what I would want it to
Basically, you
like.
do a lot of their work for them.
Yes, so once you've done that and you leave them with the option of copying and pasting and debating your idea, you've made that work easier. But then if you dump it on them, expecting them to carry their textbooks to do the work of legislation, I mean, they are busy sharing bags of rice in the communities, they are busy sharing kekena peps in the communities, they are not going to put in that kind of work you want them to put.
Well, to be fair, because we do try to be fair, I mean, there is an awful lot of work for that committee to do. I mean, I saw somewhere over almost 14,000 suggestions and submissions have been made. I mean, including your own, of course. I mean, that's a lot of suggestions to be processed.
And then I'm also feeling that they might be overwhelmed, given also the resources they have, the limited number of staff they have, and the limited amount of time they have. If you looked at that call for memoranda and then the interview granted by Deputy House Leader, that's Benjamin Carlo, who has that committee, they've given themselves a set time frame to achieve that goal. And it's quite an ambitious time frame to be able to distill all of those ideas. So what I suspect that they will do is that they will look at the headline, look at it, and then move on. So much so that they can process as much as they can before they get into the actual proposing of the first draft of that.
Well, you haven't entirely told us what you submitted.
Yes, I will get to that in a minute. Okay.
Well, briefly, because we've got to move on.
So we're talking.
Is not our friend.
Yes. So we targeted section 77, for instance. We wanted to delete just one clause, residing in Nigeria. That clause in section 77 of the Constitution, residing in Nigeria, has made it practically difficult, if not impossible, unlawful actually, for people in the diaspora to participate meaningfully in the Nigerian electoral space. Now that they contribute in terms of manpower, in terms of resources, we are thinking that if you delete that particular clause, it gives them the opportunity. INEC will now further work out the modalities within the Electoral Act and within the guideline to find ways to do that. But once you have given them that impetus in the Constitution, you process it.
So voting capacity for people abroad.
Voting capacity for people abroad. And then you look at section 78, for instance. Okay, we're now looking at 78 gives INEC the powers to conduct elections and to determine the processes. But then that parameter is so broad that it doesn't give it guiding principles. And we're saying that there must be some kind of philosophical principles guiding elections. So, for instance, if you're arguing elections now, your Supreme Court is looking at what is called substantial compliance. And that substantial compliance is the Electoral Act, which is inferior to the Constitution. So we're now looking at, for instance, things that say that the conduct of elections must abide by these principles. Things like freedom of citizens to exercise their franchise. in any part of Nigeria without fear of intimidation or discrimination. Fair representation of persons with disability. We're looking at free and fair elections which are free from violence, intimidation, improper influence, corruption, accurate representation of the voting decisions of the public, conducted by a truly independent body, transparent, administered in an impartial, neutral, efficient, accountable manner, and conducted in accordance with the Electoral Act. Election guideline as may be issued by INEC. Now, this is important because now, if you had noticed through the litigations from 1999, what the lawyers have been facing with, especially lawyers of the opposing side, is that the election guidelines seem to be a little bit inferior to the Electoral Act, which is inferior to the Constitution. So what we did with this is that we dragged up the election guideline and mentioned it directly in the Constitution. And so dragged up the Electoral Act and mentioned it directly, although the Electoral Act had been mentioned about 4 or 5 times, but we now included the election guidelines, so that you now give that guideline impetus that INEC can no longer go anywhere to deny their guideline, and so that guideline becomes much more operational. So some of those arguments are what we made. And then you also see that if you look at other parts of the Constitution, you will see how draconian the electoral space is. For instance, do you know that it's unlawful for instance, support groups to participate or canvass for votes? And many people don't know this because it has not been implemented. But once you leave that law there, a government will come to implement it. So we're now saying that you must expand a bit to allow political parties, campaign councils, and their support groups to solicit and canvass for votes. It's also unlawful in Nigeria today to receive donations from abroad. So if you're running for elections and your wife is in abroad, she can't send you money. If she sends you money, you must have to give it back to INEC. And that's unlawful. So we're saying that you must have to expand that parameter a bit to include legal citizens of Nigeria who might be resident elsewhere, that they are able to impact. I understand the rationale. I understand what they're trying to do. Then we also talk about partisanship of INEC members, that we're now trying to make it outrightly spelled out in the Constitution, that if you had become a member of a political party at some point, that you're not eligible to be appointed into INEC until 10 years has elapsed since the last time you held membership of a political party. We're also talking about issues of qualification.
So that's what you're asking them to do?
Yes, we're asking them to do.
That's an important point.
Yes, and then issue of qualification too. We're now asking, you know, that omnibus description of who qualifies or what disqualifies a president was limited, that you must be convicted of a crime in Nigeria. And we're now saying that, but then when you come to the State House of Assembly, you see that if you are convicted of a crime anywhere in the world, you can run for State House of Assembly. But if you are convicted of a crime anywhere in the world, you can run for Senate, you can run for presidency, and you can also run for governor. So we're now including just a clause, or in any other country. So that if you are convicted of these kinds of crimes, in Nigeria or in any other country, that those kind of crimes are considered egregious, that you will not be qualified to run for office. There are other amendments, for instance, running of political parties, things we just looked at. For instance, if you look at the Constitution, there are about 66 items on the Constitution that talks about elections. What we did is that we distilled these 66, critically looked at them, and then see how many of these can we alter, and then it will impact the credibility of the process. Those were the 16 items that we've targeted, and we are engaging with this National Assembly to see that those items are passed into law. But this is just an important first step. There are issues with the Electoral Act that has to be taken up at some point, and then there are issues with the election guideline that has to be taken up at some point. And one of the things we included here now is that the election guideline must be done in consultation with leadership of the political parties, so that INEC does not arbitrarily go and get a gadget and impose it on Nigeria. That gadget had to be tested, those gadgets had to be audited, those processes have to be audited, and when they pass those integrity tests, those are the times you can now use it on Nigerians.
Right.
So well, some of those things are the things that we're looking at.
Right. I have to say that I'm impressed with your enthusiasm. Clearly, this puts a lot of weight on your shoulders and the shoulders of your organization as a public policy group. Are you fairly happy with the process so far, or has it left you disappointed?
No, it's not yet time to be disappointed. And frankly, the process is just starting. All right, they have not even drafted the first which is, they do the first one, the second one, public hearings, the third one, and then it goes to the states. All right, so we are happy that part of our recommendations, and indeed that of other Nigerians, will be reflected in what will be drafted. It's only when we have seen that process. But then if you look at the body language of the leadership of the both houses of the nation, you see that they clearly have a goal. For instance, state police is a goal. And looking at them, they are set out to achieve it, because although it's receiving opposition, but that opposition is feeble enough is not strong enough to stop what is happening. So they have clear identity things that they want to achieve, but then it is now left for us and other Nigerians to say, while you are pursuing other objectives, which are noble, these are also things that we think you can do to help the country move forward a bit.
Well, come back and talk to us as the process progresses. But impressive stuff that you're doing there. Chima Christian is the Executive Director of Africa's Morning Center for Public Policy and Good Governance, and they've been part of the many people in this country who've made submissions to the National Assembly towards towards constitutional amendment. Thank you very much indeed for coming.
Thank you. If I may, I want to
very
add
briefly, because we're out of time.
Yes, the work we do is also in collaboration with other organizations and other funding partners, including the many Nigerians who donated to see to it that this work was carried out. And I want to give them credit for that.
Thank you very much indeed.